All right, welcome, my relatives, to another fantastic edition of the Warrior Vox podcast, Warrior Evolution. I hope you are subscribing to this. If you're watching this, if you haven't yet, go ahead and click the like to what will be a great time together. Is it a podcast now? It's really is a vidcast podcast. We are going to feature this on Spotify. In addition, if you want to support this work, there's a couple ways you can do that. I'm on patreon.com, so you can go to Warrior Evolution podcast on Patreon, and we'll have a link for that in the description. Also, this is really an extension of the nonprofit Sober Clean Warrior Society work, the Seven Feathers Society.org. So that's a way to tune in to just kind of what this mission is about. It's really about helping to provide support, mentoring, initiation, and in-depth experiences for people in recovery. And there's a big focus on men's healing and menswear. So you're going to see that a lot in our features and our stories and videos. It doesn't mean that's the only thing that we're talking about. There will be additional or forthcoming resources for really all genders, all ages, working a lot with youth and elders, people of color, just all sorts of just different ways of seeing this whole thing about recovery and healing and what is that all about. So please subscribe if you haven't yet. Check out the nonprofit site, www.sevenfeatherssociety.org. It's really an amazing time right now. It happens to be around another holiday. I think we did a Halloween podcast. We were right on Halloween. Now we're on St. Paddy's Day. So, Aaron Gobra, if you're Irish, I guess it's a great time. This was a time when I'd go out when I was pubbing and clubbing back in my youth, or as we called it, amateur night, when all the wannabe Irish drinkers come out. But no, it's interesting to think about this particular holiday as a guy in recovery, because I don't go out at all to do that stuff, and I haven't for years. And so it'd be interesting sometime to talk about, like, what does the drinking culture say about traumatized people and about historical recovery and all this kind of stuff. So we'll save that for another time, I think. But just to make mention of that, there's a lot of people out there who are going to be using and abusing themselves tonight. So just be careful out there. And there's other really powerful things happening right now. It's my daughter's birthday. So that's awesome. She happened to be born here. It was my wife's birthday yesterday. My wife and I just got back from a very powerful couples retreat in San Diego with Tim and Annie Dalter. And that was really amazing. Just a few couples in San Diego doing some deep work in healing relationships. So I'm just kind of coming off of that energy and celebrating my daughter's birthday and Cindy's birthday. Also, getting ready to launch some important men's work. I just want to mention that. We have a monthly men's gathering called Odyssey. And we're gathering now more or less somewhere in Egan or in the Twin Cities, St. Paul area. And that's also featured on the website. You can check out that. But it really is there to help men come together in a powerful way, do some work, share story with master storytellers, people like Walton Stanley, Tim Young, and others. Or Timothy Young, excuse me. So we have just a really good lineup of people for that. Also, I'm getting ready to put in the latest edition of the Twin Cities Men's Center, offering a new class called Beyond Anger, Reclaim Your Fire. And that is really about understanding that at the root of a lot of these emotional imbalances of men is a powerful healing spirit. And rather than suppress, deny, or avoid that energy, we want to help men to get the skills needed to bring out that energy in a good way. Because this fire that we carry as men, as people, is spiritual in nature. It's creative in nature, but it can also be destructive if we don't find a good way to use that. So we created a 10-week course. It's called Anger Management 2, to kind of supplement or complement the ongoing success of the Anger Management course at Twin Cities Men's Center. So we're going to start that April 18th. So go to tcmc.org to register for that today. It'll be a really amazing venture into this spiritual quality of healing and healing our emotions. So hope to see you there. Well, on to today's topic. We are sitting in the, 22 days or so, 23 days since the invasion of the Ukraine. This has been a huge just intensity for me emotionally, and I'm sure a lot of people. It's a global impact. My family, my mother's side is Ukrainian and Russian, so we have those kind of shared energies on different sides of that. It's very real probability, like a lot of people out there with that ancestry, that we have relatives right now on both sides, possibly engaging each other, possibly even, killing each other or defending themselves from that. So his hearts go out to Ukraine and people in the land, feeling that today, and have been for a while. And that really spurred this conversation I want to have today. And this is about war and what happens to people, and what happens to men, going into battle, and the long-term effects of all that. And I couldn't think of a better companion for this conversation and guide than my good brother here. So I want to welcome you, Shire, aka Ted Harrison, as you're also known. And my appreciation of you goes all the way back to the beginning of my involvement in Boys to Men. And you were the elder pouring the water for the lodge for the young men, that initiation weekend. And that's
I remember that one.
it's powerful times. And that's really where I got to learn about you. And, you've also done work in my own thing, in marriage counseling and other things we've shared. And I just want to welcome you to this conversation as a Viet Nam vet, part of the Brown Navy, as it was called. Is that right? The Brown.
Oh, for me, the Brown Water Navy.
The Brown Water Navy, which you can talk about what that was, and just all the incredible work you've done as a counselor, advocate, spiritual leader in vets recovery. So welcome, Shire.
Thank you.
Yeah. So could you help just paint that picture a little bit, and what Brown Water Navy, what was that about, and just say some words about that, and we'll jump into the themes here, what's going on.
Okay. It was a term that was used largely in the Mekong Delta for those that went up and down the rivers. I often refer to myself as a river rat. There, it's very interesting. They had very high tides, 20 feet. And so on ingoing tide, literally the water would run inland from the ocean. And then as it got close to the tide changing, it would slow down. And it would go at a pretty good clip too. And then they'd be real still, and then it'd start going the other way. Well, all of this silt got stirred up, and on an outgoing tide, the river would flow out to sea, and it was brown. I've seen it flown over it and looking down and seeing the brown water coming out and mixing with the ocean water. And so that's kind of where that term came from. And one of the tours, or part of, we stationed several different ones. We'd be in country, R&R, and back, and that was down in the Mekong Delta with the Mobile Riverine Force, which was a commissioned joint Army-Navy unit. It was one of the first commissioned units like that since the American Civil War, when the Union Army had a riverine unit down in Louisiana. And
this is 1968 that you started in Vietnam.
That's when I was there, yeah. I got there about 7 months after the Tet Offensive, which was a big deal because on the Tet Offensive, we thought we knew what was going on, but the Viet Cong came back and kicked a whole bunch of butt. And we got there in June following the Tet. Tet was in February, I think.
And how old were you when you arrived in Vietnam?
I was an old guy. I was 23.
Okay.
I'd been in the reserves and had gone to college and stuff like that and got deferments. And then it came my time to go. And so I was like 23.
A little older than the 19-year-old that we hear so much about right there, tours of service there. And, we've talked about this a few times, so just, in terms of what we're saying about what happens when people, are, suddenly find themselves thrust in that situation, when men find themselves thrust in that situation. Here you are, you've been recruited or you enlisted or something happened, you got drafted, and you show up. What happens?
Well, drafted's a little bit different, I've been taught there's three kinds of armies. There's a slave army, which is basically draft, or you capture somebody and say, you pick up this weapon and go shoot them or we're going to hurt you.
Like conscripts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do it by capturing people or you can do it by draft. That's a slave army. And then there's a mercenary army, which is in for the benefits and the spoils of war and what you can take, steal, or free college or whatever. And then there's a guerrilla army. And the first two go off to war. The third, the guerrilla army, they don't go off to war. They're on their land, their ancestral lands even. And it's real different for them. And the hardest army to defeat, which we're learning, is a guerrilla army. Because they don't go off to war. And it's kind of interesting. So I kind of understand that a little bit.
War was brought to them.
Yeah.
And that's what you were facing in Vietnam.
That's what we were facing in Vietnam, right? We were there supposedly to protect them. It was this domino thing. If this country falls, and there's a string that'll go down.
The evils of communism.
Yeah.
Right. Don't want that to happen.
I learned pretty quick that was a lie. And which was a shock. I mean, I can remember my first day there. And when I learned what the lie was. And because that night we came into Da Nang and we anchored there. We were going to go in the next morning. And the airfield up above was under attack. It looked like a 4th of July up there. Rockets going, tracers going, the whole place lit. And we thought, holy mackerel, what are we getting into? And we watched that for a while because the next morning we knew that we have to navigate this river around the mountain and then go to the bridge ramp, as it's called, and then beach. And the boat I was on, we would beach and get out and walk on the land, next morning, first light, we did that, and I was a radarman, I did my navigation thing, and I can remember we beached, I could feel it, and they secured sea and anchor detail, and I got to see what this place looks and smells like. And the radar shack was kind of like a closet behind the wheelhouse, and I walked into the wheelhouse and turned to my right to go out, and the watertight door happened to be open, and I saw at eye level a huge Shell oil sign, that big, the yellow with Shell and red letters. I thought, this is about oil. And I learned more and more, as it went on, just how much it was about oil. Oil and actually rubber was the other thing. And for Michelin tires. And
how did you feel when you saw that and you realized, wow, there's this kind of corporate thing going on here, industrial kind of cause for being here?
Well, I've been lied to. This is about oil. And I will say for Shell and other, because I worked a lot with vets when I came back. I'd meet them under bridges and we'd do stuff, and renegades go up in the boundary waters and stuff. And a lot of them knew that, but the whole Mekong Delta was laid out in which oil company had drilling rights for where.
Wow.
And when it was laid out, I learned that later after we were going around in the Delta doing the brownwater thing. And oil was a big one, and then rubber was the other one. A vet I worked with, like I said, I've worked with a lot of vets, was telling me about his first combat patrol. He was in the Army. And when you're the newbie on a patrol, nobody wants to be near you, because you don't know how to spot booby traps. And you can trigger stuff and this. So
Huge risk.
You're the risk, you know. And they're walking down this trail, and there's trees and stuff, and he hears a car horn beep beep, and then boom goes a Corvette right by him down the road they're walking on.
A Corvette.
A white Corvette.
You're sitting there thinking you're going to get shot, and also Corvette drives
this
by.
is what he was thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, and the top was down, and there was two Vietnamese dollies sitting on the back, and the hair blowing, and on down the road it went. And he didn't know what to make out of it, and the guy next to him says, "Oh, that's the guy that owns the rubber plantation that we're guarding."
That you're guarding.
That we're guarding. Huh. And then he named, rubber. That's when he realized the lie for him.
I see.
That there's something else that was here. And in terms of that particular conflict, that was part of the lie. Mm-hmm. For all I know, there's lies with any war.
It makes you think, right? Because you have all the reasons that they got you in for, and then there's...
And then you show up and it's about something else.
How does that affect your ability to function and fight and go through it? Because you're stuck there for a while, right? Suddenly you find yourself in this position, and then what happens to you emotionally or spiritually over time?
Makes alcohol look better.
Mm.
You know, because in a lot of ways alcohol is part of that too. Mm. But it does, for me, it's like, now I've been lied to. How do I get out of here alive? That was the issue. How do I, putting my life on the line was one thing. I knew I was going to be doing that at some point. But when I discovered that there was a trick, or a lie to it, then how do I deal with that in order to make it home safe?
You're no longer thinking about serving your country and all those ideals, right? You just want to survive at that point.
Survive it, yeah, get home. And actually it was real hard for me because I had no one, not even in my family, say they wanted, to hope to make home alive. The only person that said that to me was a Filipino woman who I met in Subic Bay when we were on R&R. And she really from her heart says, "I really hope you make home alive." That was the only woman that said anything. And that was really hard because you need to have that kind of connection. Maybe some people had it in other ways. But I didn't have it.
Is it that people don't understand that that's how they should bless you because they don't realize how much danger you're really in? They don't notice
some of
that?
It, yeah.
Or are they expecting something else from you?
Well, it's probably different, part of my own shock is after I got there, the woman I was married to stopped writing me. And tied up with a lawyer and ended up going off with him. And so I didn't have that anchor back home.
Now it's an emotional connection to feel like you have a place to go, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we had a whole system like when you write free on the envelope for stamps, depending on how I wrote it, she could tell what part of Vietnam I was in.
Your own code.
And we had our own code. So when news came out, if the news was about an area that in I Corps and I'm in 4 Corps, then she can relax,
I suppose at that same moment you might even realize how big of a predicament you're in. If you didn't already know, right? You realize that it's not a granted that you're going to make it home. What happens long term? You go through these experiences for whatever reason you found out whatever you found out, but then what happens down the road?
Well, for me, I came back and I started working with other vets. Eventually I became a clinical social worker and psychotherapist. But when I got back in Madison, I ran into a couple of vets, Bob Cook and I'm blanking on the other guy's name, the little short guy. We worked with vets because veterans didn't trust the VA. I didn't want to go, I didn't trust them. And I was trying to figure, and we met under bridges, and we met in different places, and then eventually started going up into the boundary water.
And why meet that way? Was it? You feel like you can't trust the rest of society or trust the resources given, so you have to find out.
Most guys I knew didn't trust the VA. We went to the VA, and we were required to do that for the Agent Orange physical. I was exposed to all of that, and it got real clear they weren't interested in anything other than, do you have a family history that might point to where some of those symptoms would go, rather than the Agent Orange. So, and for the most part, a lot of vets didn't trust the VA then.
It's like they're looking for a scapegoat, so they don't take responsibility for what happened.
That's right.
I see.
And instead of, did you get hurt? Can we blame it on your Aunt Sally?
Oh, jeez.
Or whatever, or family lineage, or whatever.
Talk about compounding salt in a wound. I mean,
yeah. Well, that's a good way to put it. It's the salt in the wound. And that's why I think a lot of veterans from the Vietnam era, anyway, didn't trust a lot of things when they came back. And when we started doing stuff that, was not associated with the hospitals or whatever, guys started showing up.
Mm-hmm. And what are they going through? What are these men who've experienced that betrayal, those hurts, those psychic wounds? What ends up happening to them?
Well, one, they need to talk about whatever their tour is. One of the powerful experiences that I had was in the early 90s. There was a gathering in Minneapolis, and a conversation between some Vietnam veterans and Russian Afghani vets, because Afghanistan was Russia's Vietnam when it started out. And so in the early 90s, and we had interpreters and all of that stuff, and it was powerful. In fact, one of my favorite shirts it's got an American flag symbol, the hammer and sickle, the red one, and for the Russian things. And we learned those guys were just like us, only younger. And on the back of that sweatshirt or t-shirt, it says, brothers of one fate. And there was a brotherhood that was there between us and those Russian vets that was pretty strong. And I can still remember that. And we even went up into the boundary waters with them for a while too. I mean, it's like they were just like us. And they could get talking about their experiences speaking Russian. We knew what they were talking about, even though we didn't know the content, but by the emotions. Some, first firefight or whatever. And we could get all talking, and they knew what we were talking about, even though they didn't speak English, unless we slowed it down, and they had the interpreter. But we were alike. And that was a powerful experience for me, as a veteran, and talking with other veterans that, they're like us. Especially if there's been deception. And when there's been deception, that's hard on you. And you then have to try and make sense out of something. And the sense is, it doesn't make sense. That's how I made sense out of it anyway.
Right.
This is crazy. And
it's a type of insanity that you're asked to bear.
Yeah.
Be a part of.
And being able to name it.
Right.
And the sense is, it doesn't make sense. And then to talk with others, we find a way to get connected again.
And that's part of healing.
Yeah.
That's really what we're talking about. In the end, is how do we go from the shock and the trauma and all that, and how do we unpack it? Into
Being shot at's an interesting experience.
That's one way to put it. I mean, I think going to the store and finding a good deal on your favorite product is interesting. Walking down a field and having rockets or guns and bullets fired at you, that's a level of interest that I don't think most people have an understanding of.
And even though it might have been a different weapon or whatever, it is there's a common thing that's there, you know, and you know, my brother is a vet, even though he was never in the military. He blew 3 fingers off when making model rockets when he was a kid, and so he couldn't pass the physical.
I see.
But he could fly helicopters like nobody else, and small planes. And he ended up flying helicopters for the CIA and other places down in Central America where we weren't. And we had those lies going on.
You're talking about the 80s now. Yeah.
And
the Contras and all that. And
yeah.
LA North and all that.
And he did that. In fact, he lives along a river in Florida, and there was a guy he was noticing and looking to, and finally one guy came up to him. He says, "I remember you now. You used to fly a helicopter barefooted, and you had a red beard." Because my brother had bright red hair. And he said, "You're the SOB that picked me out of the jungle after I got shot down." You know, because he always had the glass thing there, and he literally picked him out of the jungle. You know, I mean, he has a lot of combat experience. So you don't have to be in the military, because when you get into it and you start discovering where the lies are, but he's part of the lie for him is he was being shot at and rescuing people in areas where we, quote, didn't have troops. And that made it really hard for him.
Because you can't really even talk about it or even...
Right, because nobody will believe you.
That's right. Like, there's nothing going on there. Yeah. So you have to, again, live in this insanity. And
in a lot of ways, people have a hard time talking to vets because they can't really relate to it. But veterans can. You know, Bob Cook and the rest of us in Madison, and kind of, for me, it started there, and working with them. And I do a lot of stuff with vets now. I'm involved in a big program down in Winnebago, on the southern part of the state. You know, we want to provide housing for 50 homeless vets.
What's the name of your program?
The Veterans Resource Center. Basically, we have a school, or an old school with its hospital part that we've a couple of vets bought, and it's Veterans Resource Alliance, and we're trying to pull it together. There's a number of different people working there.
Are you looking for contributions or support for that?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
If people want to support that, how would they do that?
I'd have to get you Mary's information, and she would do that.
Well, we'll see if we can do that, and then we can provide it.
Yeah,
because part of the link here.
It's you know, it's a big project. You know, and it's interesting because in that area, this state, there's more millionaires than any other area, and most all of those millionaires are farmers. Hog farmers are with corn, and a couple of the vets that are down there that are big time farmers were the ones that put the money down to help buy the hospital. You know, where we're at. So there's a lot that's going on with veterans organizations, American Legion, as well as you know, private kinds of things.
And like the psychological work that you're doing as a therapist and that kind of work directly.
And even the thing it's a burning point for me, is the VFW. I mean, they've changed their tune now, but when I came back, you know, I went to try and join them, and they said they wouldn't accept me because I had not been to a foreign war. And it's like, well, what did you, you know?
What was that?
Well, that was the VFW at that point. They didn't accept Vietnam veterans
Oh, wow.
at all.
Wow.
They do now.
Okay. That must have been really heartbreaking.
Oh, it was real hard.
And shameful.
I still feel it.
Yeah.
And you know, it makes it even difficult to go there now. But you know, they kind of woke up when they realized that a lot of their World War II vets were dying off, and their membership was going down, and they needed, you know. So now,
well, whatever it takes to get them to wake up and open the doors a little bit. So
we can talk. You can talk.
That's
and
what
come
you need.
home.
You need a place to feel welcome. I know there's a lot of this sort of disconnect and different versions of what was, you know, what you're going through, what you're greeted with, and all this dystopia inside of you, right?
And a lot of my teachers were native.
Okay.
You know, that, you know, I've got some native blood in me, and so a lot of my teachers were native medicine people. And that they were the, when I came back, and they weren't wanting to talk about, nobody was, where I found, I went to a Sundance, and they were flying a POW flag at the Sundance.
Yeah.
And I knew then that they knew, and they did a couple ceremonies with us, any of the vets.
Yes.
And they understood, and that POW flag was there.
I know a number of vets, including men who run Sundance, who said that the sacred fire and the ceremonies and Sundance
that was the healing.
Is how they healed. Yeah, because it's to a place where spirit had to go to do some of that work.
Right, and be understood. And you know, and on one of the early Sundances, they called all veterans out there that wanted to, and I went, and they did what they called a red hand ceremony, and they literally painted our hands red for blood, and then they had us dance. Not only the dancers, those who were pledged to dance, but any of those, and we danced our dance. We danced our tour, and then came back to the tree, and then they washed our hands.
Wow! You had to clean that grief and that blood,
so that you could carry the sacred pipe, and it was part of all of it.
Because you can't carry a pipe, right? If you've taken life, that's a tradition.
You have to
go
into a lodge or do. Different traditions have their way, but basically, when you come back, now you have to be civil again, and they had ceremony to do it, and there were different ceremonies, and that was one of them, and that was one that was especially powerful to me, and that they were doing not only for the dancers, but any veteran that was there could come to the tree.
Just welcome them up and do some of that cleansing.
They, you know, and then they did a round of dancing where and each veteran could dance their own tour. So I could dance around with the others and dance my, you know, in my own mind and dance my tour.
And it's helping you to release the memory and the spirit of that whole tour.
And pull it together and then come back to the tree where you wash your hands and you're ready to walk into the village.
Beautiful. Yeah, otherwise you're carrying that spirit of death and suffering and grief with you. And
the native people knew how to bring people back.
We talked a lot about this in the Sobriquet Warrior Society and why those ceremonies are important. I really want to thank you for bringing a powerful discussion at a very important time. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about, you know, what's going to happen down the road. I'm like some people, you know, looking beyond this immediate emergency and praying that, you know, we don't have to lose, you know, more people, more children, more women, more of the Ukrainian society and this sort of media iron curtain around the Russian people that's happening, and just really want to pray for the liberation and for the
truth.
For the truth. Yeah, the liberation of truth. Yeah, and justice to arrive sooner than later, so we don't have to have so many more losses. And I
the
think
truth may be ugly, but if it's named, then you can heal it.
Yeah.
And the truth of a war is ugly.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be named.
And in that naming and in what's going to unfold, I'm thinking of the rebuilding process and how do you repair? There's so many relationships that have been damaged,
Mm-hmm.
and not to mention the lives lost and the destruction, but just between those peoples. And I feel it inside of me, having Russian and Ukrainian ancestry. It's like, wow, the sides of me are fighting in wanting to heal that. And so I guess what I'd like, since we're here together talking about spirit ceremony, is what I invite you to do a blessing and a prayer for those people and for all of us who are affected by that. A prayer for the Ukrainian people and for the Russian people in terms of healing and support.
Okay. Well, since tobacco is important and part of the covenant, I'm going to put a little tobacco on the table.
Okay.
And because that's partly what I've been taught, and that it's part of the covenant between the Creator and the people in North America is that you pray with this plant and your prayers will be heard. And so, when I'm making a prayer like that, I often will just put tobacco on the ground or whatever. Eventually I'll put this on the ground. But I'll put a little tobacco here and honoring and remembering the hoop. It's all one. And we're all one. And I'm grateful for this time and remembering the powers of the directions in the east and the south and in the west and in the north. And we invite you to be present with us here now in this way and in this circle, knowing that we are all one and the one is all of us. And that's even in terms of when you're in a war and you recognize the humanity of who it is that you're battling with, because we're one. And I remember having an encounter with Viet Cong face to face. We were breathing the same air. And I recognized this is another live person, and it's part of the hoop of life. And so put the tobacco out as a hoop of life, and I invite all veterans. And in fact, I think it's good for veterans to talk with veterans of other campaigns and recognize the oneness. And I'm thinking now, in terms of a Christmas Eve in World War II, of a story that I'd heard between the Germans and the Allies, and they were both celebrating Christmas, even though the languages were different. And they're in the no man's land, out in the middle. You probably heard the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, World War One.
Yeah, where the Germans and the Americans and the Allies all went out there and they sang Christmas carols and recognized that oneness. That in the morning they go back and out comes the gas and out comes the weapons, but we're all one. And that's really the message, the one. That's the wholeness. And that's the teaching. And I think as veterans, if we talk not only with those in our era, but with those in other campaigns and other wars too, you start to recognize the oneness and be able to heal from that separation of life that sometimes happens when you're in that setting. Because it's all one.
No.
And there are many different stories with that. And when we recognize that, and then we can perhaps solve problems without trying to kill one another.
Yeah.
And that's the task. And so those are the words that I want to offer here. and the sense that I want to offer in the healing. And it's not only just for our Vietnam era, but all the eras and all the different ones, including the new ones that are being planned and laid out now. Strange memory. I remember talking to a Sicilian woman, a woman from Sicily, and she was very, very interesting. She said, you know, for the last 200 or more, maybe way long years, every army in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, and even from other nations has marched through Sicily. Soldiers have marched through. And soldiers do what they do. They rape. And so we're related to everybody. And that's how she kind of made sense out of her trauma. But it's kind of like there's not and you name the country, Africa, France, U.S., they've all marched through here, and they're our ancestors. And she really felt that kind of connection with everyone, even though the lineage was mixed with violence.
Right.
And it was a powerful time with her, you know, to be able to understand that and how she had found the healing there in the oneness of it all.
To oneness, the unity.
The oneness.
Powerful words.
And that's the one. It's all about one, and one is in the all. And that's an indigenous teaching.
Wow.
And it's also a teaching from other traditions too.
It just reminds me, I think, like unity. Like I just heard this article about what spells the end of a military operation or some kind of action like war or something is like when the women get involved, because if the men are involved, it's soldiering and war and this kind of thing. But when the women start getting involved, it's kind of spells the end of it, because that's kind of like when the whole society is kind of rising up and taking a position, and that's happened in the Ukraine, right? Like women soldiers and even younger women, younger people are getting involved. And I think, once you have the elders and the women and the children, not just the men fighting, then now it's kind of it's the end game.
There's a different voice that's present.
Yes, and so I just want to pray too for protection for the people that are defending their life and their homeland, and that we can experience the hope of unity and healing for these people.
And that oneness, and I sometimes talk about it in terms of how many different languages use the word God and speak of the Creator. And there's many languages. And are they each one speaking about a different God? To me, it's all one Creator with many voices. And that's part of the oneness, is recognizing that it's all one, no matter what your words are, or your language is, or any of that. We're all in this together. And that's where the wisdom is, and that's where the healing is for me, anyway.
Thank you, Shire. This has been a powerful blessing and a time to reflect on all these.
Thanks
things.
for pushing some of those buttons, and because I hope I didn't get too buzzed out there. But
not at all. It's been great to have you. I want to thank you, and in respect to the time allowed for us to be here today and allocated, I just want to say miigwech and pilamia, and thank you, and
Mitakuye all my relations.
We're all related. Yes, sir. As always, good to be in conversation with you. Look forward to another time we can gather again.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in and listening to Warrior Evolution. To support, please subscribe, like this video, share it, talk about it, and give us your feedback at our websites, www.sevenfeatherssociety.org or warriorbox.com. Thank you.